Thank you very much. Okay, I'll just get started. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Viewers, good morning. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you for joining us. We've just got a few people joining in now. So first of all, my name is Annie McCann. I'm one of the co-founders of this amazing network called the Right Pen Collective, which was founded probably about 6 months ago or early in the pandemic. I don't even know what date is half the time with this lockdown, but it's very exciting to be here because I have to say it's quite an honor to be part of this event and this network, because this is the first time we've ever hosted an Australian Muslim writers virtual festival. So first, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land. Specifically, I'm coming to you live from the Darug, land of the Darug people of the Eora Nation. I'd also like to extend my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Right Pen Collective. So the Right Pen Collective was created in an effort to connect, support, and empower Muslim writers and creators in Australia. Why? Well, I'm an avid reader, as are the two co-founders part of this network, and we love reading and we love reaching out to Muslim co-Muslim writers who have published books. As you can see, I love collecting books, but a lot of the writers that we have read are international. We haven't actually reached out to a lot of the Australian market. So this is an effort to try and connect everybody to hopefully see our books, or the Muslim community books, as commonly as we see Vegemite on our supermarket shelves. So before I go any further in terms of introducing our special guest, I would like to bring in the co-hosts Aksen Ilhan and Uska Semedik Alkan, the two co-founders of this amazing network. Just a bit of housekeeping. Once again, when you received the Zoom link from us last night, you were advised that this meeting is being recorded. So if you do not want to be captured in the recording, please just make sure that your camera is off and we won't capture you. Also letting everybody know that we have closed captions, so hopefully you can follow along if you can't hear us. And also we will enable a chat. If you have any questions for us or our special guest, please send them directly to Aksen Ilan directly. Please send them to her, and she will send those questions through to us as well. Just also a reminder that this is a safe place for everybody that is here, so any form of abuse or disrespect will not be tolerated, and we are not above removing you from here. So please enjoy the festival. Thank you very much for your interest, your support. Once again, I'd like to thank our festival partners, which is Better Read Than Dead Bookstore in Newtown. They've partnered up with us, so all the books by our special guests this festival you can locate on the website, which will be in the chat. And also, if you'd like to connect with any of us after the chat, you can connect to us through social media. Those links will be in the chat. Thank you so much, Sister Aksen, for putting them through. Also, special shout out to Print on Collins. She did an amazing job with our graphics. So much love to Print on Collins. Thank you so much for that. So, okay, I'm going to introduce you to Uska and Aksen. Sisters, welcome. First of all, I want to thank you both for that phone call that you made to me about 6 months ago to bring me on board to this it's amazing, the Right Pen Collective. Uska, maybe let's start with you. Where did this come from? You know, is it the same as me, where you're reading as many books as I am and you're like, wait, where are all the Muslim authors?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello, everyone. Merhaba. I am so excited to be here. I'm a bit starstruck being on the same panel with Randa.
As we all are.
And yes, but just putting that aside, first I'll introduce myself and I'll tell you how we ended up coming with the Right Pen Collective. My name is Özge Sevindik Alkan. I was born in Turkey. I grew up in America, in case anybody's wondering about the accent. And I moved here 14 years ago because I got married to be with my husband. I have 2 daughters. And I am also a librarian. I live, breathe, I would eat books if they let me, but I don't. And books are my life. And I have co-authored a children's picture book, sorry, I'm really nervous. I co-authored a children's book with Australian author Hazel Edwards called Hijabi Girl, when I could not find a book like this in the library, because I used to work at Islamic school library and I couldn't find a book like this. The closest one was Randa's book, Buzz Off, I think. That's the only one I could find for the age group, but I couldn't find anything else. So I took it upon our hands. I convinced Hazel to write this book with me, and now it's out and there's 2 more on the way. And my next project is a young adult manuscript looking the story of a Turkish Australian girl who goes on a road trip with her toddler and sister in tow and a boy she cannot stand to find her mom who vanished one day. And I woke up one day thinking that I need writer friends who are Muslims, because all the writers in America and in Canada, they all need each other, they're connected. And I'm like, where are my friends? Reached out to Ahsan, then we both together reached out to Annie, and the Right Pen Collective was born. And it's been growing ever since. And this is our first big event. And I want to say thank you to Randa and to all the other authors who agreed without hesitation. They didn't even say, who are you? What have you done before? Why should I give you my time to go on this panel? The united response was, yes, of course, I'll be on this festival. So thank you to all of you. I want to thank Annie and Ahsan for saying yes to me, for going on this panel on this journey with me. I also want to thank Hazel Edwards for being my co-author, my friend, and my mentor. And I would like to say to the people who are watching this, to the Muslims who are watching this, buy our books and grab your pen and write your own books. Yeah. To the non-Muslims who are watching this, buy our books and help amplify our voices. And if you have anybody in the publishing industry watching us, publishers, agents, buy our books and then have a look at us and publish our books. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, that's wonderful, Sister Iska. Thank you so much. And yes, I have read Hijabi Girl, and it's really, really cute. I loved it. I'm a very big football fan myself, although Hijabi Girl is a soccer sort of theme, but I'm a very big rugby league fan, and I keep thinking, where was this book when I was a kid growing up in Australia? Where was this? I love it. I adore it. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Sister Iska. Sister Askan, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Ahlan wa sahlan. Merhaba, and welcome to all our viewers. My name is Aksin İlhan, and I'm a coordinator for the VSL Turkish Language School. I'm also an English teacher, vice president for the ICMG Brunswick Women's Group, a mother of 3 young children, and inshallah an emerging writer for a children's book. Well, when Özge called me to share with me her burning idea and asked if I'd be happy to join her in establishing the group, the first thing I thought to myself was, I'm not published, and what do I have to offer? Özge was the only person who knew about my publishing pursuit and the contract offers I had received during this time. They were hybrid contracts or find your own illustrator and we'll do the rest type of contracts. Was not what I was after. When I studied how to write and publish children's books with an author back in the days, we were told from the outset that we're venturing into the most competitive and expensive field of publishing, and that's picture books. So I was in a relentless pursuit of a traditional contract with an Australian publisher without giving in from the Muslim identity in the story. Secondly, the thought of venturing into self-publishing with 3 little kids mortified me. So it was a drive for me to continue chasing mainstream. Along the way, I got a lot of rejections, but rejection from publishers is a common thing and it isn't so bad. So personally, it led me to refine and polish my writing. Corinne Fenton, Julia Donaldson, Graham Bass, or Jackie French, are just a few authors I aspire to. I absolutely love their books, and that's how good I wanted my story to be. The Right Pen Collective also knows the responsibility that comes with using your pen to write creatively, because its effects are irreversible. You know, it stirs, it inspires, compels, offends, or misleads. It's whatever you intend to do with it. So what we want to offer our members in this collective is information, networks, connections, the industry know-how, and to be surrounded by Muslims who are trying just like you. Inspiration. You could be saving years up your sleeve in achieving a publishing goal by being in this collective. Also, this space has its own lingo that is common to all Muslims. So you'll hear lots of salams and inshallah and alhamdulillah in this festival and on our platforms. I also want to mention what TRPC is not. So we're not a literary agency or a publisher, a representative or an endorsement agency of any author, writer, or organization. I also have to do a big shout out to Abdi Aden, you know, with mainstream and self-publishing experience up his sleeve. He led me to names like Jacinta de Mace and many other agents. So, you know, information is very empowering when you're delving into this industry. What we've learned is that the Australian publishing industry really is small in Australia. So our effort to penetrate has to be unrelenting. We have to make noise. And that's what our first largest virtual Australian Muslim Writers Festival is about, making noise with our stories and experiences. And I hope our viewers will enjoy and benefit from everything they will hear throughout the festival and with many more festivals to come, inshallah. Thanks.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. If this was an in-person event, the first thing I would have said to that is make some noise. Everybody make noise. Woo! We're unapologetically Muslim and book nerdy. Yes, I love it. Absolutely. I absolutely do. I love it. Just a little bit about myself. So my name is Annie McCann. I'm one of the co-founders of TRPC. When I'm not doing these amazing things, I'm actually the founder of another network of readers called Readers Review, which I founded in 2009. That then evolved from a small group to meeting authors, learning about their writing journey, to then me transforming into an MC. So I often MC book launches, literary events, and big events such as Supernova and Comic-Con, interviewing celebrities and authors on stage. I have recently done Comic-Con. I've recently done Supernova in the last year, which I'm grateful for before we went into lockdown. But you often find me on Instagram interviewing authors locally and internationally. So feel free to browse that as well after the event. One of the questions that we often get asked as part of the TRPC is, why have we not seen a virtual writers festival before with Muslim authors? Well, as a reader, I can actually tell you that for the very longest time ever in Australia, Dr. Randa Abdel-Fattah was the only author that I knew in the Muslim community here in Australia. In the last 5 years, as a founder of Readers Review and as a reader, I had noticed that there were more and more authors coming out of the Muslim identity, but they were overseas, they weren't here. So personally, I'm so grateful that the Right Pen Collective was created, because it was through this network that I formed amazing and forever friendships among Muslim writers and Muslim readers. So look, without further ado, I would like to bring in our special guest, Dr. Randa Abdel-Fattah. She is an amazing, formidable woman, inspirational to me, I have to say, and to many of us. And I have to say, an iconic role model in the book industry. Dr. Randa Abdel-Fattah, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't miss it. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, it's amazing. Thank you so much for taking your time out, because I know how busy you are with your busy schedule. Look, Dr. Randa, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I wanted to start by saying that I can see that Anhar Karim is here, who's one of the most amazing emerging young Muslim women in our community. And if there are any other young, people in the audience, I guess, like in a nutshell, what I wanted to say was I've always loved writing ever since I was a child, and I've loved reading. And it was my dream to be published. And I started writing my first sort of novel when I was 16. It really came out of my experiences growing up in the time of the First Gulf War, being, a racialized Muslim, a Palestinian, and I really wanted to write a book that responded to all the misinformation and stereotypes. And so it was really a book where I felt that there was this huge gap on the market, that there was no book that told my experiences and validated me, but also spoke back to the racism. So there was definitely an insurgent tone to the whole book. And so I just dug out the first draft that I did when I was 16, which was just, that I had typed up. And it became, and it was rejected by every publisher. I still have the rejection letters, but I was persistent. When I was 16, it was my dream. And I took that feedback on very constructively. They were all actually very lovely rejection letters, because every single one recognized that there was this gap in the market. But they all said, go and work on your writing. And of course, I took that on board. And just shortly after 9/11 in 2005, that's when it was published. And I guess for me, it's, if I could leave one message, especially for emerging writers and aspirational writers and young people, there is to never undervalue your own voice. Never give up as well. Of course, there are structural factors in terms of getting publishing. And I honestly believe that I was at the right place at the right time. I know that there are better writers out there than me. There's no, there's nothing special about me. I was, alhamdulillah, lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time. And I felt this need, and, it all worked out in that sense. So it's, for me as well, it's about understanding that sometimes there are things outside of our control, but also having the tenacity to do what you can with what you have. And for me, it was about being persistent and realizing that we have stories to tell that matter, that are valid, that I was really sick and tired of reading about white people's stories and white people's dreams and goals and challenges. And I felt that there was a need for our stories to be given a platform. And that has been something that has really inspired my work since then. And there's no mystery in the fact that I write with a very strong activist and insurgent tone as well. And I'm not embarrassed by that. The art is what moves me, and the creativity is what inspires me. But I also do it with a purpose.
Yeah, 100%. It's very interesting what you mentioned in terms of the gap in the market. So I'm Indonesian Australian Muslim, grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney. I love reading, particularly fantasy fiction, and I love books that have a fantasy element, but it's inspired or intertwined with, a cultural legend. And I look around me and I'm holding out for the one person to write a book that featured a West Javanese culture from Indonesia, which is where my mother's from. And they don't exist. And so that was, I guess, the turning point for me to pick up a pen and start writing my own book. So I'm working on my first novel as well, through a fellowship that I won with Penguin Random House. So that's still a work in progress. Don't know when that will be published, if it will be published. But again, it was recognizing that gap in the market. So Randa, your first book was 2005, correct?
Yeah.
The first book. So at that time, were you like the only Muslim that was published? Like, did I just miss everybody else, or were you the only Muslim at that time?
In Australia, you mean?
Yeah, in Australia, yes.
It was the first young adult novel. So Hanifa Dean was a Muslim writer in Australia who had written a few amazing books as well. But it was the first young adult novel written by a Muslim in the West. Told post 9/11 in the world, actually. So that was the first young adult Muslim sort of novel that came out of that space.
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of you getting published, you mentioned that you had a lot of rejections, and you did mention that it was constructive. Was there any time when someone actually had told you, we don't need a Muslim story on our market? Has that ever been a challenge for you being a Muslim at all?
So one of the things that I experienced, so the rejections came when it was still in its very early stages, writing as a teenager. And then what I did was, when I rewrote the first draft back in 2004, and I was working as a lawyer at the time, I wrote a lot of it on the train ride from Quakers Hill Station to the city and back, and I used to edit it at lunchtime. And I had this, it was a goal from age 16, I was going to make this happen. And I did then decide that I would send it to an agent first, that I would try and acquire an agent rather than cold call and send in an unsolicited manuscript. And I will never forget one agent, after I explained the premise of the story, saying to me, but is there an honor killing in it? Because that's what will make it sell. And so sometimes I did come across that sort of like ridiculous ignorance and just offensiveness. But there were people who didn't want to take the risk because there was no market, they felt, for that kind of a book, in which case they were basically dismissing the needs and wants of Muslim readers, and not only that, non-Muslim readers as well, not willing to take that on, that challenge. So that was an issue at the time, but overwhelmingly it was positive. Overwhelmingly publishers understood that there was no such book. So they understood the novelty of this book, and that's what probably carried it through that whole process.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. You struck me there when they said, oh, are there any honor killings in this book? I'm like, really? That's the reputation we had? Are you serious?
Well, when you think about some of the, I guess some of the things I can say as a challenge as a Muslim writer that Muslims are going to face in the publishing world, in the literary space, at writers' festivals, in reviews, in interviews. I could summarize a few of them. The first one is that, particularly as a Muslim woman, you will be assumed to be writing an autobiography, because the idea that a Muslim can be creative, that a Muslim has an imagination that is beyond, writing a sociology of Muslim life, sometimes completely evades people. And so I have honestly sat in interviews where people have said, so when you did this in the book and when you did that, and I would have to, call them up and say, actually, it's the character, it's not me. It's not, non-fiction here. It's not an autobiography. And there was that slippage over and over again. Some really funny cases of it as well, on like live interviews where they just could not wrap their head around the fact that it was not an autobiography. Another thing that sometimes Muslim writers face is people who will say to them, oh, you just got published because, you're a Muslim and that's trendy at the moment. And, you've got the sort of identity politics that you're kind of playing on that. And I've had a few sort of disgruntled white male authors say that to me, you know, that's why you got published. Or on the other hand, people who, you know, white aspiring writers will get up at writers' festivals and say, but, you know, what's wrong with me writing a Muslim character? Why can't I write a Muslim character? I'm being censored now. And so there's the politics and the power imbalances that you're going to have to negotiate and face and understand when you go into this scene, because there are going to be people who will not value you for your creativity and who will see it as some kind of affirmative action or dismiss your creative skills and imagination. So you need to be able to have a tough skin in this industry as well.
Yeah, I think over the years as well, even like book industry aside, like just being a Muslim or a Muslim woman in the Western world, we've had to grow a lot of tough skin, which we shouldn't have had to, but that's pretty much the world that we live in. And I find that quite interesting that someone actually believes that if a Muslim author writes a book, it has to be an autobiography. You've definitely broke down that misconception with all the books that you have written. Can we do a very quick montage or show and tell with the books that you have written for those who may have not read your books? Because they're very good. You need to read them.
Yeah, you asked them to get them.
Yes, please.
So that, is it clear? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear. That's how many books Randa has written. And FYI, they're not all autobiographies or biographies at all. They're very creative. I've got a few here myself. I'd like to show everybody. Is my head big in this? Incidentally, I went to high school with this lady. Sasha. Yeah, I did. Yeah. So again, not an autobiography, but this is a very good book. But actually, my gateway to your work, Randa, was Noah's Law. I read this. That was my gateway to your work. Yeah. So for those who haven't actually read this just yet, this is about like a young boy. He's, you know, I would say he's spoiled and he's naughty, and his father had enough, so he sends him off to, you know, punishment by working with his auntie's firm. But then he gets wrapped up in a case, and he can't get away from it. So I loved it. I couldn't put this one down. Like a lot of mystery, suspense.
I wrote that book actually. The idea came to me in a meeting when I was working as a lawyer. And there was a lawyer who was talking to us about a case, and he asked me to take minutes of the meeting. And as he started speaking, the idea came. So I pretended to take the minutes of the meeting, but actually plotted out the book in the meeting. I still have those notes. Inspiration will always come at the most random times. And that's the best. You have to record them or you'll forget.
Oh, that is very true. Yes. So I'm somebody who carries this around. It's just like a notebook, and I write, because I don't trust my phone. So tip for aspiring writers, just carry a small notebook with you and a pen. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes even like the most random things, like a tree or something, could even inspire a scene. You never know. But look, one of the most important books I felt that Randa wrote was this gem right here, When Michael Met Mina. Randa, could you talk us through this one, if you would, please?
Yeah, so that was my last young adult novel. I was doing my PhD. I was in sort of researching Islamophobia and racism in Australia from the point of view of the perpetrators. I was attending a really difficult, it was a difficult part of my fieldwork. It was an anti-refugee rally that was being held on the, next to Macquarie University. And one of the far right people that I was interviewing told me to come along. So I was standing there interviewing people, feeling completely disgusted by everything I was hearing. And then that's when the idea came to me, what if you were growing up in a family who subscribed to these sort of racist views and you were being socialized in this kind of an environment? How do you build the capacity to resist and to fight and to challenge, and to also have the sort of racial literacy to understand that what you're hearing and being taught needs to be pushed back? How do you even start as a teenager to know where to go to get that sort of information when you're being fed so much of this kind of stuff online and in your family circle? And that's when the idea came from me. So I decided that, you know, it's all very well and good to write a book based on your PhD, but, you know, I wrote one, you know, only academics will read it. I really wanted to then take those ideas and theories and actually put them in a young adult novel. And it's a dual narrative between the main character, Michael, and an Afghan refugee girl called Mina. And it's also a very feminist book because Mina's not there to you know, rehabilitate Michael or to teach him how not to be a racist. You know, she tells him, that's your work. You've got to sort out your own privilege. I'm not here to figure it out for you. I'm not going to do that labor. So yeah, there's a lot of things part of that book that mean a lot to me at a particular part of my life as well. And a time in Australia where 2015, where we had the real rise in mainstream normalization of these far right groups. Yeah,
it was very interesting. I felt like when I was reading this, I thought, wow, I wonder what Randa went through to do a critical analysis enough to show two narratives in this book. And so I guess, yeah, my question I'd like to ask you is, when you was, writing Michael's perspective, how difficult was that for you to sit through, an interview with someone that has a very different view, particularly far right? How do you overcome something like that?
Yeah, well, when I did my PhD, it was difficult sitting down, and at the beginning, I was meeting people who openly told me, we want to set up abortion clinics in Lakemba, we want to drop bombs on the Middle East, and we just want to stop Muslim migration. So I spoke to a spectrum, that kind of extreme far right, and then the I'm not racist because I have a Muslim friend and I've traveled to the Middle East and I like kebabs, kind of, those sorts of racists too. So there was the whole spectrum. And when I started writing the book, I actually, the characterization of Michael's parents was far more extreme. And then after I wrote the first draft, I actually thought with my editor, it's so much easier then for readers to pick up this book and say, that's not me. And not actually, and then just completely disassociate themselves. What I wanted then was to tone it down and to make him more likable, the kind of person who you can recognize some things in yourself as as somebody who belongs to the majority, and then can actually start to figure out, well, actually these microaggressions, or what do I really think about multiculturalism? What do I really think about Indigenous sovereignty? All these sorts of things I could push back on. So I had to rewrite the whole characterization of the parents.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it was very difficult. I remember hearing you talking about this at a writers' festival before, and I was thinking, oh my God, I don't think personally I could sit there and listen to that narrative. It's very difficult for me to hear that, even though it's, I understand that, okay, that's your opinion and that's, how you deal with that. At the same time, it's like, okay, I don't think I could sit that. So I just want to say, you were very brave to go through something like that, Randa, I have to say. Very brave. I have to say. So the next book that I wanted to talk about, or actually I wanted to just give a very quick shout out to No Sex in the City, which is a book that someone's mentioned in the chat that's one of their favorites. I wanted to give a shout out to this book. This is an adult one, so not yet young adult, this is adult readership. I think the character's like 22 or 23, HR student. I was like, yes, I have to read that. I'm HR background. I have to do that. But this is your most recent book. So Coming of Age in a War of Terror. Tell us a little bit about that.
So that was based on my latest academic research, where I was looking at that whole generation born around 9/11. What does it feel like to grow up into the so-called war on terror, to not know any differently? How has it impacted their lives from really three perspectives: their trust relations at school. So can they speak freely in front of their classmates and their teachers? What does school mean to them? Is it a safe space or do they feel censored? And then how they feel in terms of fear, like, are they scared about terrorism? Because the media is constantly feeding that, and politicians, people are scared of Muslim radicals, people are scared of a terrorist attack. Well, if you've grown up in it, what do you actually think about that? And then your politics, your political agency. So I interviewed young people in Sydney schools, and I also held writing workshops because I really wanted to give them that chance to speak on their own terms and write on their own terms. And so it's really a book about their testimonies. It also goes through the history of the CVE space, the countering violent extremism space in Australia, and what that has done to young people, the way that it has mobilized this idea of young Muslims at risk, of being radicalized on this conveyor belt to extremism, and how that has shifted. In some cases it's really prominent moral panic in the media. In other cases it falls into the background. And then lastly, looking at how all of this actually can be linked to the wider sort of muting of political agency in Western society in the name of freedom, in the name of national security, in the name of freedom, so-called free speech, in which white racists get a platform, but Indigenous women are silenced, Palestinians are silenced, women of color are usually silenced the most and punished for speaking. And so I kind of link it to that wider context.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, if you haven't read any of Randa's books, particularly the last one here, Coming of Age in Terror, those books are available at Better Read Than Dead. There is a website in the general chat, so please, you need to get onto them. I feel, every book that Randa's produced, they are important in their own different ways. And I have to ask you probably a very controversial question, Randa. Do you have a favorite book that you've written so far?
Really, yeah, I do actually. Where the Streets Have a Name. So the book that was,
yes.
it's probably the book that's the closest to my heart because it's set in Palestine. It had a lot of my grandmother in it. And it was my way of being close to her, being so far from her. And it was a book that, talking about like the politics of publishing, there's no way I could have been published with that book as a first book. I had to have written the other books to gain that platform, to get that entry into that space before I could dare to introduce a Palestinian story for young adult readers. And there was a bit of controversy when the book was published overseas, you know, but it was, you know, it was surprisingly taken up by a lot of translations as well in Europe. And so it just, you know, there was again this gap. I feel that it was the right place, right time for that kind of a book. But the timing was also important. There's no way I could have done that in 2005.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why? Like, I'm just trying to understand why you couldn't publish something as important as that back then. Is it simply because nobody wanted to read it? Is that what it was?
No, publishers probably wouldn't have touched a Palestinian story because, so it was just the politics of writing and speaking out as a Palestinian. You know, even when the book was adapted to the stage and performed as a play by Monkey Bar in 2017 in Sydney, you know, we had, you know, amazing support from schools, but then there's always little voices, you know, who attempt to try and censor and to stop things from happening. And so there's always that extra sensitivity on top of being Muslim, on top of being Palestinian.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. It is a tough battle from what I'm hearing, but at the same time, it's not an impossible battle. So, you know, if you are somebody who has a story to tell, and you want to get your book published, don't let these things stop you. That you can overcome them. There is always a light at the end of that tunnel. There's, you know, I never say impossible. You know, it might be slow, it might be delayed, but it's never impossible. Definitely. Randa, what does it mean to you to be a published author in Australia and of Muslim identity? What does that mean to you?
Like, you know, it depends on when you ask me, because sometimes I kind of resent the idea that I kind of sort of resist the idea that I'm a Muslim writer. You know, this is again the sort of double bind that we find ourselves in, because when I write, I don't go in there as a Muslim. I have my Muslim hat on. I mean, it's a kind of the idea of what does identity mean. It's so fluid. It's not something that's fixed at any point in time. When I start writing, I am totally a creative person. You know, for me, it's playing around with words and sentence structure and the magic that comes with creating something out of nothing, with having total control of your characters, whether you're going to let them live or die, you know, when you're going to cut a character out of a book, as I've had to do a couple of times. That's what moves and motivates me. You know, it's the creativity. So sometimes when people say you're a Muslim writer, there are going to be moments for people here who are aspiring to get published where you are going to feel a bit of a resentment, because it feels like you're being pigeonholed. And what does it mean to be a Muslim writer? Does it mean that every story I write is because I am a Muslim? On the other hand, I am unapologetically a Muslim, and it is part of my identity. But again, there's some fluidity to that. And so it's not necessarily that I'm bringing any kind of politics or any kind of, there's no sort of purpose behind it necessarily. There are some books which are very much about being Muslim, that they're very much immersed in that sort of community. And I don't pretend as well to be speaking on behalf of all Muslims. It's another thing. You know, people will often assume because you are a Muslim writer, this is the definitive story of what it means to be a Muslim woman. And you'll get it with your book, that this is the definitive Indonesian Muslim story. So there's, there's a lot of questions around that.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of like in your writing experience, Randa, how have you seen the publishing industry evolve or change over time? Do you think that there's still a huge gap, particularly in the publishing industry and in, you know, with books by Muslim authors or Muslim writers, or even Muslim representation? Yeah.
Well, I'll take a step back and actually say there's two things. There has been a huge evolution in terms of the recognition by the industry, which is extremely white dominated, from the editors to the decision makers to, you know, from every production, everything is still heavily dominated by a white majority. But what I would say is that absolutely we are seeing more platforms and more spaces. The thing is for people of color to be writing. The thing is though, that the publishing space has a real problem with that kind of you know, influx of these voices, and sometimes it can't deal with it. So you might get three books by 3 people of color being published in 1 month, and honestly, reviewers lose their minds. How are we going to review 3 books by 3 people of color? We'll just throw them all into one review, rather than individually, you know, give them each the space that they deserve. No, we'll just lump them in as, you know, the books by people of color, or you know, how much attention can we give to one, you know, compared to another? So there's this politics here. That's why I know very well that when we have books, you know, that are going to be published, we speak to each other. So when is your book coming out? When is yours coming out? Because they're not going to be able to handle 2 of us in 1 month. They're not going to know what to do with us. Whereas you could have 10, 15 white writers published in 1 month, and they will each be given the time and effort and attention that they deserve. But another thing that I noticed, especially after, so my son is 7 years old, and last year I was, you know, trying to get him into reading, and he struggles with his reading. And I could not find a book that would engage him. For some reason, he wasn't even interested in the Andy Griffith kind of, you know, books that usually hook boys in. And then as I started to look more and more into that space of the early readers, I realized there's actually no explicit books that are explicitly about anti-racism and multiculturalism, that explicitly take on these issues. And even if you look at the Premier's Readers' Challenges or the lists, there are books about soccer, sports genres, you know, friendship genres, all these different genres, and there's nothing about race or multiculturalism. Then Black Lives Matter happened, and I thought, wow, you know, overseas, there's this massive, there were all these articles, huge demand for books about race, and in Australia, the same thing. But one thing that was missing in Australia was that the demand for books about race for children was not there. So people were noticing the demand for adult books. And so I approached my publisher and said, you know, what we need a series written by people of color that target that younger readership, you know, the early readers, so that it becomes part of their vernacular and their vocabulary, this idea that they are seeing their multicultural playgrounds in the books they read. It's not just, you know, a books written by white people about, you know, white stories, that they actually reflected. And so the book series will be published next year, and it's called Our Stories. And the first book will be written by an Indigenous author, and the second by Alice Pung. And so I've got Maine White as the Indigenous author, Alice Pung is the second author, and then the next lot will be a book written by me, by a boy called Adam, who is trying to fast, who's in kindergarten, but keeps breaking his fast at school. And so all these stories are really about introducing multicultural life to young people in a way that's not didactic, and that really, again, shows them the world that they live in, but also has an anti-racism, you know, spirit in there. And that's why I start with an Indigenous author, because multiculturalism, when it's absent from the idea that from the you know, we have to absolutely center Indigenous sovereignty and voices. And so that's why I start with an Indigenous also to frame the entire multicultural narrative that will sort of be the thread through these books.
Definitely. You know, it's interesting that you said that there was such a demand for these, you know, anti-racist books, but at the adult level. Personally, for me, I think if you're targeting the adult readership with anti-racism books, by then it's too late. You know, you need to actually start them at a younger reading level. So when they grow up, they understand it's not just a changing of a mindset. This is actually something that we've grown up with. This is a world, and particularly, like, I think your book, Coming of Age in a World of Terror, hits the nail on the head, because I'm showing my age now. I was in school when 9/11 happened. And so at that point, you know, where I grew up in Western suburbs of Sydney, it was very multicultural, although the library didn't exactly have multicultural books. They did embrace multiculturalism, and we did have multicultural days, carnivale, etc. I was unapologetically Indonesian, you know, going to a school like that, but I never found myself represented in a book growing up. But at that time, you know, we sort of grew up understanding, okay, yeah, this is what it is to not be racist, etc. If you were born from 9/11 onwards, that era, that's I guess the biggest battle in terms of trying to send that message. And that's 100% agree. You need to start at a younger reading level in something like this with children's books. So conscious of time, I just wanted to check, we're having a bit of a technical difficulty with our chat. So I do apologize to our viewers if you were trying to send a chat through for your questions. We're just going to see if we can get some questions through. Sorry, everyone, just bear with me. I believe, hang on, let me just make sure. Sorry, technology is going wonderfully, isn't it? Yes. Oh, while I'm just waiting for the chats to come through, hopefully we've got some questions for you, Randa. But one question I wanted to ask you, because we were talking about, the importance of having these books. Personally, as a Muslim reader, what is the importance of Muslim representation as a reader? Yeah.
For me, I mean, when I read a book, I'm not looking necessarily for a Muslim character. It really depends. Like, again, I don't think any story is neutral. Power it definitely makes a difference. I'm just bored. I'm just bored of the same stories and the idea that these stories matter. That we have not seen every variation of possible way you can live as a white person in this world. It's just a matter for me that it's time that we actually understand that we don't need to center whiteness anymore, and that it's not that these stories do not exist. They are there and they've just been silenced. They have not been given the opportunity. So for me, it's more boredom. I want to read more of these stories, but I also want to read stories because that show such richness and diversity. Because at the beginning, of course, my book, it's clearly speaking back to stereotype, and I didn't have the freedom or risk to do more than that, and what I want and what we're seeing now is all kinds of Muslim characters, not just the character that's going to respond to a stereotype. That's all I had available to me then, because we were literally in a space where we were either the oppressed Muslim woman or the terrorist. And so, what I want now and what we're seeing emerging now is that the more Muslim representation there is, the more interesting, nuanced characters and ways of living we can see as Muslims. And it doesn't have to be part of a message or a broader sort of pushback against the stereotype. I'm so done with responding to stereotypes. I think we really need a moratorium on that.
I hear you. I hear you. And I'm sick of having to be asked to, can you condemn, these terror attacks? I'm like, dude, I didn't do that. Like, why are you asking me to condemn that? That has nothing to do with me. And, in terms of readership and how it's evolved, I still feel that there is a bit of a gap personally as a reader, but I am starting to see that gap closing. There is still work to be done, but there is work being done to start closing that gap. And I think, like you said, it starts with the publishing industry. It starts with the editors, because it's not that we're not writing, it's just that we're not being heard and we're not being seen. And I have to say that, growing up, I loved comic superheroes myself. I'm a very big geek. I loved, Wonder Woman and all that. But it was only 3 years ago I learned about Ms. Marvel Kamala Khan, who is a Muslim superhero. I was thinking, where was she? And I didn't know that before until I watched Black Panther. And that was the first Black superhero I'd ever seen. And that was only a few years ago. So it goes to show in terms of the work that needs to be done to close this gap. So to the viewers, I think we're having a bit of a technical difficulty. So if anybody had any questions, can you please send them to me and I'll make sure that I ask them. My handle on Zoom is The Right Pen Collective. It should be the first name that you see. Send your question directly to me. I'll make sure that we get asked. So I do apologize. It's the first live interview. So apologies for any technical difficulties. Randa, tell us about what you're reading at the moment, if there's anything that you could recommend to us.
I'm actually reading Loveless World by Susan Abel-Hawa. So she's a Palestinian author. And so I'm just started that. I just wanted to quickly say something about that last point though.
Please.
What I'm seeing now, which is so energizing and so exciting, is that we are seeing Muslim writers take more risks now. And we are seeing, like, if you look at, I think I was speaking with Michael Muhammad Ahmed a couple of weeks ago about how, when you think about sort of the Muslim literary space, it's, a giant jigsaw puzzle, and each of us is putting a piece in that puzzle. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure placed on that one piece to represent the entire puzzle. And that's what we need to change. We need to think about how each of those pieces has its own nuance and its own value and richness and quirkiness, and on its own terms. And so we are seeing books, where there is that kind of riskiness and absolutely, you know, not interested in speaking or speaking back to a white mainstream. And Michael Muhammad Ahmed is a person who does that almost stuff. Sarah Saal has coming up with a debut novel, but her poetry collections do that. Then we have, you know, which I'm very excited about, you know, that the space where we're seeing, you know, for younger readers now. So we have Huda Hayek, who's going to be speaking, Malati as well. I think she's done, she has some really gorgeous books with that legal spin as well. And I think—
Yes, Aisha Dean, yeah.
Yeah, the art. And that's what I love seeing, you know, books where being Muslim is incidental. We have Amal Awad, who's a Palestinian, who's been writing for a long time as well. So we've got this, I'm sure I've missed out on big names here, and I'm going to kill myself later about who I forgot. But what I'm saying is there is more, I hate the word diversity, but, you know, there is this space of Muslim writing now, and it's not all this cookie cutter. You know, there is a bit more freedom now to write with that kind of, you know, agency, and also writing with self-determination. I think that is something that we should not let go of. We should really continue with that, so that people don't feel pressure to write a certain space. You can be a Muslim hijabi and not write about a Muslim hijabi. You can write about anything you want.
That's right. That's also like a stereotype that I see often as well. It's like, oh, you don't wear a hijab, so how can you be Muslim? Like, no, that's not true. Look at us. Like, look at Randa, look at myself. It's a choice that we made. So, and we're entitled to that. Oh, alhamdulillah, we have some questions coming through. Thank you. I'm so sorry. We've had technical difficulties. So I was like, I'll do this. Okay. So Ramneen Khan, thank you so much for your question. Ramneen would like to know, how do you freely and confidently write about Muslim stories without creating a stereotype or image? Thank you for your question.
I guess because I've been doing this for a long time now, that sort of the activism in me, the activism experience as well, gives me sort of the tools to know how to write a character who is not going to fit a certain stereotype, because I know what the stereotypes are. And it's also just the editing. You know, you go back and you write, and you rewrite, and you rewrite again and again. And you think, is this character authentic? Is this character, you know, it's about good characterization in the end. And I don't, you know, when I write, I'm not thinking about what kind of Muslim character is this person in this, you know, parade of so-called, you know, Muslim characters that I can pick and choose from. I'm writing a character in and of their own right, and they become their own person. Every writer here will know that there's a point where you start writing, and sometimes you're inspired by someone you know, and then that character, that as you start writing, takes on their own personality and becomes, you know, a living creature in your world that you've created. That for me is that sweet spot when you know you've pushed past that stereotype.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry, my fingers are like all over the screen because I'm just checking all the chat. So I'm so sorry, everybody. Okay, here we go. Sorry, excuse my finger.
While Annie's going through that, I have a question for Randa too.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. Yes.
Now, sorry, I'm the one that's having the technical issues, so if you can see me. But Randa, Abdi, you know, has published through the mainstream and self-published. His most important advice to me in one of his workshops was that try to get your first book published through mainstream so that you can have more control over your narrative in your in the following publication pursuits. Do you give any credit to that? Do you think that's right?
You mean as opposed to self-publishing?
Yeah, like, you know, your first book, try to achieve mainstream publishing, try to land that traditional contract. It will give you more control over your other books later on. What do you say about that?
Not necessarily, because sometimes mainstream gives you less control. So it really depends on the publisher that you're approaching. I think it's really important, honestly, it's really important that when you think about why you want to write. If you're only writing because you want to be published, that is the end goal.
Yes.
You know, for me, when I started out as that 16-year-old, that's not actually what drove me. What drove me was the passion as a Muslim in the 90s to fill that gap and speak back to that damaging, dehumanizing stereotyping of our community. That was what drove me. Even if it didn't get published, writing that book and somehow getting it out in the world was important to me, no matter how I did it. But if your sole goal is because I want a big name with a big publisher, I think then you have to rethink why you're doing this. I think just being like authentic about who your audience is as well. Some people don't want a mainstream audience, and that's fine. They want to be indie. They want to speak to the margins. They prefer a smaller publisher who isn't going to, you know, cannibalize their voice, who isn't going to add the the metrics of how many books can we sell, and what's it going to look like in a bookshop. So sometimes it really depends on the kind of book you're writing and the audience and your goal and purpose. So I think there's a lot more to it than just a hard and fast rule about straight away going for the mainstream.
Great. Thank you so much, Aksan, for your question. Okay, we've got a question from Tasmeen Khan. Thank you so much for your question. We don't often find YA protagonists that are open about their faith. So how do you balance this in a way that keeps the audience broad and not strict to Muslims? Thank you so much for your question.
It's a really good question that came out when I was co-writing the screenplay for Does My Head Look Big in This? By far the most difficult thing was, how do I convey somebody's spirituality and somebody's a conviction in their faith and the way that it informs everything about their life in a way that my reader who isn't Muslim is going to get it, is going to understand it. That is a very difficult thing to pull off, and it just means that you are constantly reworking and trying to. There's no answer to that. There's no way I can answer that in a quick way. It's just about the editing process. It's about how can I, sort of convey that as best as I can. But then there's also a space where there has to be some mystery, and there's going to be a point at which the reader is just going to have to suspend their own, their own cynicism or suspicion about religiosity, because let's face it, there is a general fear or suspicion of it or disdain for it, and understand this is the character. So it's just about writing and rewriting and just practicing how to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have another question here from Anhar Karim. Thank you so much for your question. Anhar says, Assalamu alaikum. My question is, what specific hardships do intersectional communities face? Example, female Muslims with a disability, etc. face, and what work is being done to champion intersectionality among Muslim authors? Thank you for your question.
That's a brilliant question. So I think that it really speaks to this idea of what I was saying before, that fluidity of identity. So, sometimes when I write, I'm writing it from a point of view of a Muslim Lebanese character, for example, and it's the Lebanese-ness in a particular suburb. So it's the intersection of the class and the ethnicity and then the gender. If you are a writer who understands the intersectionality and has that politics and has that orientation to understanding the world, then it will come through your writing. It will make your writing more solid. And I think now that people are engaging with these or understanding intersectionality more, and not just as a buzzword, because we all live it, it will come through in the writing. And I think that now that's happening a lot more. We have amazing writers out there who are so able to write the specifics of a character and not represent that this is all Muslim. This is a very specific narrative, like in the western suburbs of Sydney, of a particular sect of a particular religion at a particular point in time. And that brings out the best writing, I think.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. Our last question comes from Tamara Haque, one of our guests. Actually, she'll be joining us later this festival. Tamara would like to know, mainly mainstream traditionally published books with Muslim characters still feed into Western narratives, agendas, and white savior complex. How can we overcome this? Thanks for your question, Tamara.
Yeah, just keep writing and pushing back and making those books redundant, just relegating them to the airport trashy novels that they are. Drown out those voices. We know that those are the books that sell. I know I could have been a millionaire if I had just written that, desert, Saudi desert, Saudi princess escapes to the desert with her white knight. We know that those books sell, but we have to make those books the embarrassment that they are by keep writing and pushing back and showing that they are just stale, fantasies of white writers. So yeah, just make them completely redundant.
I love your answers. And Randa, I love everything that you have shared with us today. It has been an amazing experience sharing the virtual stage with you. Oh, excuse me. We have one more question coming through from Stephanie. Sorry about this. Stephanie, thanks for your question. Within the medium of video games, writing is becoming more engaging and robust. How do you see Muslim characters becoming more widespread into video games so that gamers can become more engaged with Muslim characters? Thanks for your question.
Well, as a mother of a son who is a complete gamer, I would love for Muslims to infiltrate that space where the Muslims are not, where my Muslim son is not fighting Muslim terrorists in the game that he's playing,
That would be nice.
So the Islamophobia that we see so openly in the gaming industry is something that is only ever going to be tackled if we do have more Muslim writers in that space, pushing back against that and rewriting those scripts. Yeah.
100%. You know, just to add to that, what I was saying before in terms of Ms. Marvel Kamala Khan being the first superhero, that was the first time that I haven't ever seen in a pop culture reference that a Muslim wasn't the terrorist or an Arab wasn't a terrorist. That was the first time that we were the hero. And I was like, yes, that would be lovely to see a video game where if it's not Miss Marvel, but somewhere else, you know, it's happening. And, you know, it is starting to happen. Like there's another book called Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. And that was the first, you know, middle grade book, or one of the first middle grade books that I've read, that it's a young Black girl from the projects and she's embarking on a quest to save her brother. And it's not talking about the struggle so much. It's more like she's just embarking on a quest, and they finally made a video game out of that. So I'm looking forward to the day that they're going to create a video game out of one of our Muslim books. That would be amazing. That would be fantastic. Look, Randa, once again, I want to thank you so much for sharing the virtual stage with me. It's an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. I'm always starstruck when I meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Last question I would like to ask you is, in terms of aspiring Muslim writers here listening to us today, what would be your last piece of advice that you would pass on to an aspiring writer?
To get manuscript feedback on your manuscript before taking it to an agent or a publisher. So really making sure that it's polished, and it has to be from someone who isn't related to you, okay? Actually investing, if it means investing a little bit of money to get it objectively assessed, which is what I did, externally assessed, so that you actually have that feedback and you can make sure that it's in as perfect condition as you can possibly get it before it's seen by an agent or a publisher.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Randa, once again, thank you so much for giving up your time to talking to us today. Just a reminder to everybody that the festival has just started, and we do have some panels. We got one panel today and the rest will be happening the rest of the week. Some panels have been booked out, so thank you so much, including this one. This was a full house, so thank you so much for that and all of your support. And just a reminder to everybody again, don't forget to hit the Better Read Than Dead website. If you wanted to get Randa's books, they are available, or they can order them in if they don't have it. So definitely have a look at that website. If Usker and Aksan are there, I just wanted to thank them as well. They may have had technical issues before, but thank you so much for being the powerhouse behind this as well. And to all the viewers joining, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.